Hello everyone, and welcome back to the Mystery Theory. Today is another soft-spoken Wednesday, and we're going to talk about the Milwaukee Cannibal. If you've been here on my channel for a while, you know that I have a series of videos in depth about this case. So if you want more information, please check out the series. It will pop up on the top of the screen and in the description box down below. Now, today we're going to talk about his case, but also a few ironies in his case that I didn't cover initially. So get ready, because this is pretty interesting, for lack of a better word. Okay. When investigators first searched the apartment of Jeffrey Dahmer, what they found really is described as something that make them gasp. I would say more than that. They found severed heads and limbs, skeletons, skulls, and other grisly artifacts filled this apartment, and they were described as souvenirs from the 17 men and boys that he murdered, dismembered, and sometimes ate between 1978 and 1991. Long story short. Born in Milwaukee in 1960, Dahmer was the child of a troubled marriage. His father was a workaholic chemist, and his mother was an unhappy teletype instructor. The two argued constantly and eventually divorced in 1978. Jeffrey didn't seem to be bothered by this initially, but when he reached puberty, he became withdrawn and began drinking heavily. Jeffrey committed his first murder in 1978, and unlike the killings that would follow, it was unplanned. 3 weeks after graduating from high school, Dahmer invited an 18-year-old hitchhiker to his house for some drinks. When the young man tried to leave, Jeffrey hit him in the head with a 10-pound dumbbell. He then cut up the body, placed the parts in garbage bags, and buried them in the woods. Not long after, he enlisted in the army for a 6-year stretch at his father's request. 2 years into his service, he was discharged for excessive drinking, which interfered with his performance. He eventually moved in with his grandmother in West Allis, Wisconsin, and found a job working the night shift at Milwaukee Ambrosia Chocolate. Starting in September of 1987, Dahmer began to entice young men to his grandmother's residence, where he murdered and dismembered them. In 1990, he moved into the apartment on North 25th Street in Milwaukee, accelerating his murderous pace. Of his 17 known victims, 12 were killed there. Like most serial killers, Dahmer tended to follow a pattern. He would find his victims at bus stops, bars, malls, and adult bookstores, and lure them to his home with the promises of alcohol, money, if they agreed to pose for photographs. When they get to his apartment, he would drug his prey and then kill them, usually by strangulation. He liked to collect body parts and sometimes engage in cannibalism. He also took photos that he could later use for his own pleasure. Yeah. He was finally caught and arrested in 1991 when prospective victim broke free and ran into the street with a handcuff that was kind of hanging from his wrist. During his trial, he pleaded guilty by virtue of insanity, with his lawyers arguing that only an insane person could have committed such atrocious acts. Well, not really, but okay. The jury found him guilty, in case you didn't know, and sentenced him to 15 consecutive life terms in prison. When asked about the motives, why he did it, he said that his compulsion to kill became, quote, an incessant and never-ending desire to be with someone at whatever cost. It just filled my thoughts all day long. I'm sure most of you know that less than 3 years after he was convicted, he was beaten to death in prison by Christopher Scarver, a 25-year-old inmate with schizophrenia-like delusions. Well, let's talk about conning the law. One of Dahmer's victims escaped only to be returned to the killer by the police. I shared the story already, but let me give you the short version. In 1991, Konarak Synthasmophone was found wandering the streets of Milwaukee, drugged, confused, and bleeding. When the 15-year-old was questioned by 2 police officers, he named Dahmer as the perpetrator. Dahmer told the officers that the boy was his 19-year-old lover and that the two had had a fight. Though the woman who had found him insisted that he was in trouble, the police chose not to run a background check on Dahmer and did not verify the boy's age. Instead, they allowed Dahmer to take the 14-year-old back to his apartment, where he promptly killed and dismembered the victim. Following news of his murder, this 14-year-old boy, there were protests accusing the police of racism and homophobia. That is messed up. I mean, I cover that extensively in my in-depth of this case, but even the short version it's scary. Now, there was something, I remember reading an article about the officers that searched his apartment and what they found and how that haunted them for the rest of their lives. Imagine just going into an apartment of this sick individual and find a human head and 3 bags of organs in a refrigerator. I mean, you open the refrigerator door and that's what you find. 3 heads, a torso, and various internal organs inside a freestanding freezer. So, chemicals, like chloroform in a closet, 3 painted skulls, a skeleton, various body parts, and photographs of victims in a filing cabinet. 2 skulls in a box, acid, and 3 torsos in a 57-gallon vat, driver's licenses and other IDs from the victims, and, okay, this is the kicker, but one of the things that impacted them the most is finding a King James Bible. Yeah, it's kind of completely the opposite of the rest that they just described, and maybe one of the most popular items that most people either believe in the Bible or sometimes they don't, but they do have one, they do own one. Well, that was one of the things that shocked them the most. It is said by the experts in this article that the extensive damage that Jeffrey Dahmer did was not only to his victims, but to the minds of people, including authorities, after he was caught. After he was caught, it was open, the people started to be open to the idea that there are sick individuals out there that are capable of committing these horrible things that people don't want to think about. People don't really want to think about this. So, what the implications of what he did, it really touched more than just his victims. His victims' families and friends and people that knew them. His family, Jeffrey's family. But it was much, much worse. So, this is just one of the examples that needed to be covered in this cannibals series. And even though I do have that in-depth series on him, I think that this kind of sets up the I don't even know how to say it. I mean, this kind of set up the rest of the series, and kind of we will come back to him with different cases that will be shared. So I didn't want to skip him in this short version of the insanities he committed, but this really ties to everything that we're gonna share in this series. So again, if you want to listen to this series completely, I'll have that in the description box down below. But such a horrible story, such a horrible state of mind, you know? How powerful it is to feel lonely, and how some people that are really not the right mind can commit crazy, crazy crimes and crazy things in the name of being with somebody, even if it means that they're not alive. You're creating this fantasy in their minds that, okay, if I do this, then I'll have this friend forever. Again, a sick mind. But it kind of shows us in this beginning of the series that feeling lonely sometimes is more powerful than we think. That can lead us to feel a certain way and to do things that, in this case, they're crimes and they're horrible. And but in other cases, feeling lonely means finding somebody toxic for some people, being codependent with somebody that is not the right fit for you. Sometimes even trying to find love, or trying to find this company in the name of love, I should say. And yes, it may not get as bad as what this guy did. In most cases, it doesn't. But it kind of shows us that, not being alone. Not being alone, that's not the problem. But feeling lonely can lead us to horrible decisions. In this case, for Jeffrey, decisions that affected hundreds of people. And sometimes when there are other decisions that we make in order to feel like we're with somebody, like we're not alone, sometimes instead of destroying other people's, it ends up destroying you. Just a thought. Thank you for being here today, guys. I hope that you join me tomorrow for another video on this series of cannibalism. Actually, tomorrow we're gonna talk about another part of this series that we talk about fires, and that's how they're kind of connected. They have a weird connection between cannibals and people that set buildings in fire. Their story behind it, what the expert thinks that they have alike. And in tomorrow's video, we're going to talk about how a drunken argument ignited one of the deadliest blazes on record in New York City. You probably know what I'm talking about, but we'll go through it tomorrow. Thanks again for being here. Talk to you guys tomorrow.